It's our third and final week of the No Offense series. If you hadn't had a chance to hear the last messages, go back on this platform and have a listen.
Well, hey there, Elevate family. Great to have you with us for the third and final week of our No Offense series. And I've just been so encouraged by the feedback that we've been getting for this series. You know, our number one goal in our teaching is to be helpful. And when I hear people giving us the feedback that something that we've taught has actually helped them in life, particularly in this area of offense and not taking offense, it's just incredibly encouraging. So just in case you missed it, quick recap. Week 1 of this series, I taught a message called Stop Taking Offense, and really put it out there that it is possible to ultimately become unoffendable. And if we learn to become unoffendable, we learn to live and remain in freedom. Last week, I talked about dealing with those people, which really was about learning how to disagree well. And actually that to get to a place where disagreement, if it's handled well, doesn't have to become destructive. So look, I would encourage you at the end of our online experience today, either go back and watch those messages if you missed them, or you can jump on any of the major podcast platforms, search for Elevate Church Perth, and we'll be there, and those messages will be there as well. But those first 2 weeks were largely preventative. You know, how to prevent taking offense, how to learn to disagree well so that things don't become destructive. I am aware, though, this is a principle in life. Better to have a fence at the top of the hill than to need an ambulance at the bottom, which is great. However, occasionally there hasn't been a fence, and maybe you've found yourself tumbling down the hill, having been offended, having been hurt, having somebody do something that's caused you now to be in a place where you have some residual bitterness under the hood. So I want to look at that today. I want to look at a couple of practical things that you can do when bitterness takes over. So if you've got your Bible app or your Bible, how about you pop that open to Hebrews chapter 12, and I'm going to just jump in there to the New Living Translation. Now, a little bit of context. This book or this letter to the Hebrews, it was written to the Jewish believers. We don't actually know who the author was, but it was written to the Jewish Jesus followers at a time where they were very much the minority in where they lived. In the Jewish kind of bubble, and things were quite difficult for them. In fact, so much so that they were almost ready to throw in the towel. And this letter speaks into that situation, into that group who were about to kind of pack it in because it was too challenging, it was too hard. And the author wrote this in verse 15, "Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." So the author uses this visual root of bitterness. And it's because the thing about roots is, whilst we can't see the roots, we can see what they produce. The shoots, if you like. And these, specifically the roots of bitterness, produce actions. You might find yourself saying things, thinking things, doing things that are actually the byproduct of the root of bitterness that's developed under the surface. And you do these things and you might think to yourself, I'm sorry for thinking that way. I regret saying that thing. I'm really, promise I'm not going to do that thing again. I'm going to stop it. But the problem with this approach of just trying to kind of clamp down on the behavior, the thinking, the speaking, the actions, is those are the shoots. and we won't actually remediate them unless we ultimately address the root of bitterness. And by the way, I've got some experience with this. About 3 years ago, when we moved into this house, in the rear corner of our yard, or the fence line, I noticed just over the other side of the fence, there was some pretty significant bamboo shoots, like many meters high, in our neighbor's property. And I was, that's fine, just noticed, just saw it. And then upon closer inspection, as I ventured down towards that corner of our property, I noticed that on our side of the fence line, there was some bamboo shoots that had started to appear. And I didn't want bamboo shoots. I had a different vision for our landscaping than bamboo shoots. So look, I went into action. Phase 1, I just started to lop them off. As soon as they appeared, and bamboo shoots are fast growing, I just lopped them off at ground level. But then they'd keep coming back, sometimes within days. So, okay, let's kick it up a gear. I launched phase 2. Phase 2 was to get my shovel and dig down a bit further and kind of try to hit them a bit below ground level and get rid of them that way. Well, didn't really work. They would come back again within days, certainly within a couple of weeks, they were back. So I enlisted the services of one of my friends. He runs a gardening business, and just between the two of us, he brought in a very questionable cocktail of, how should we say it, not environmentally friendly poisonous chemicals. And he didn't tell me that because he knew I wouldn't have approved. And he got busy trying to just poison this bamboo outbreak. Well, that worked for a little while, but eventually the bamboo shoots reappeared. So we went for the nuclear option. We got my friend's laborer to come in and dig and dig and dig. And look, here's what happened. This laborer, he got waist deep. He dug a trench that found him waist deep below the ground level. And he discovered a bamboo root that had grown from our neighbor's property underneath the fence line and was now growing about 1 meter underground. It was about 1 foot in diameter and about 4 or 5 meters long. It was like a bamboo anaconda that he discovered. And it was only then, when we exposed the root, that we then were able to attack the root and remove the root. And guess what, people? Spoiler, the shoots didn't come back. Once we removed the root, the shoots have never come back again. See, look, these are bamboo shoots. Beautiful. And we love bamboo shoots, not in our garden. We love them in general. We have bamboo furniture. We have some bamboo chopping boards. Our toilet paper here at home is made from bamboo. So no trees are destroyed in the wiping of our little tushies. And the thing about it, and that's the reason bamboo is so fantastic for these kinds of uses, is it's fast growing and somewhat infinitely renewable. But then here's bamboo roots. Bamboo shoots are a gift from God. Bamboo roots, they're from the devil. And we had to attack the root in order to prevent the shoots from doing their thing. And that's the jump-off point for what we need to do when bitterness takes over. We need to attack the root of bitterness. Now, Psychology Today explains the journey to roots of bitterness being established simply this way, that all bitterness starts out as hurt, is how they explain it. Over time, that hurt starts to morph into anger and resentment. And then, over time, that anger and resentment starts to establish the root of bitterness. And over time, this root of bitterness starts to send up shoots. And the writer of Hebrews explains to us that those shoots both affect us and affect the people in our sphere. The writer said this, watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. So if we want to ensure that any root of bitterness that's been established doesn't affect us and doesn't affect the people around us, we have to attack the root. And just as it was in our backyard, the beginning of this journey for healing and restoration and freedom requires exposing the root. You can't fix it if you can't find it. And this journey to freedom, beginning with exposing it, it's likely going to be a process. And depending on how well established this root of bitterness is, it might require you investing in some professional help, some therapy, some counseling, to have a safe space and to have a guided professional who's trained in this to be able to, when this root is exposed, to help you process and navigate the healing that's required. There's an Asian fable about a monkey and a jar and a banana. That a monkey one day was wandering around doing what monkeys do and noticed this jar, this kind of, more like a bottle, I guess, with a large body and a narrow neck, and that inside this jar was a banana. So, of course, the monkey found that appealing. The monkey reached in, was able to put its, are they called hands, paws, these things, inside the jar and took a hold of the banana. But because the banana was wider than the width of the mouth of the jar, the monkey couldn't get the banana and couldn't get its hand back out. Which, you think, well, it's just, monkey, let go of the banana. But here's the thing, that original fable was kind of geared to address greed. However, the exact same principle applies to bitterness. That the very thing that caused the root of bitterness to get established, the very thing that you took hold of when it came your way, and I'm not saying this to trivialize it by any means, but at some point, the solution is letting go, that your freedom requires letting go. And I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy, okay? In fact, probably the deeper, the larger, the more established the root is, caused maybe by a greater hurt, maybe by a longer passage of time, it might be incredibly challenging to ultimately let go. But here's a clue. And this is something that Jesus taught and Jesus modeled and Jesus made possible. Forgiven people forgive people. And Jesus taught about how this works. And I want to read for you what he taught. But before I get to that, here's something that's incredibly important to understand about forgiveness. See, one of the things that prevents us from forgiving is too often we wait for the other person to apologize, to say they're sorry, to express their contrition. And we feel that's the only time that we can forgive. That's the only time that justice can be served, that they said they're sorry, and we say, sure, okay, appreciate that, I accept your apology, and I forgive you. But here's an important thing to understand about forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. See, reconciliation requires two people, requires them to come together, requires an apology and an appeal for forgiveness from one person, and then requires forgiveness and then a process to be outworked that ultimately those two people can be reconciled. But forgiveness in and of itself doesn't require two people. It only requires you. And so even if the other person, the person that hurt you, never says they're sorry, and I'm not saying that's right, but let's face it, that's reality. That's going to happen from time to time. Even if they don't say they're sorry, you can still let go of the banana. You can still forgive them. It doesn't require their participation and their cooperation. But if that's your situation, if your root of bitterness exists and lingers right now, and the person who caused the hurt upstream for you hasn't said they're sorry, you can forgive them. But here's a few little tips from one of my go-to resources. Her name's Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's a practitioner, a therapist, particularly in the mental health, emotional health space. And she's an incredible resource. And she wrote a few little pro tips for what we ultimately need to do if we are forgiving somebody that hasn't apologized. Here they are. Firstly, don't try to suppress or say it's okay when it's not. That's not your job. Recognize and honor your hurt and pain. Expose it and understand it's real. And it's not okay. What they did was not okay. Even if they don't realize it, it's not okay. And then she recommends that we figure out what boundaries you need to put up and enforce. How do we put up a fence at the top of the hill? How do we prevent this from happening again? And that might mean keeping that person at arm's reach. That might require learning some language skills, telling that person, it's like, you don't get to speak to me that way. That behavior is not okay. That's unacceptable. I'm not going to stand for that. And then the other thing that I love that she said about this, that forgiving them doesn't require they apologize, and it doesn't excuse their behavior. Forgiving means their actions don't control your emotions, mental health, and happiness level. Now, these 3 tips from Dr. Caroline Leaf, we went over them pretty quickly. I can let you know that the slide deck of every week's message is available at elevatechurch.me, our website. Go to the media section and you'll see each message. There's a slide deck there. And so these points are all there. So you can go back and revise them for yourself. But let me read, and I'm just going to read what Jesus taught. I'm not going to embellish on it. I'm not going to explain it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But here's what Jesus taught, underlining the motivation and the expectation that forgiven people forgive people. So Matthew records, at that point, Peter got up the nerve to ask, "Master, how many times do I forgive a brother or sister who hurts me? 7? Jesus replied, 7? Hardly. Try 70 times 7. The kingdom of God is like a king who decided to square accounts with his servants. As he got underway, one servant was brought before him who had run up a debt of $100,000. And he couldn't pay up, so the king ordered the man, along with his wife, children, and goods, to be auctioned off at the slave market. Well, the poor wretch threw himself at the king's feet and begged, "Give me a chance and I'll pay it all back." Touched by his plea, the king let him off, erasing his debt. Well, the servant was no sooner out of the room when he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him $10. He seized him by the throat and demanded, "Pay up now." The poor wretch threw himself down and begged, "Give me a chance and I'll pay it all back." But he wouldn't do it. He had him arrested and put in jail until the debt was paid. And when the other servants saw this going on, they were outraged and they brought a detailed report to the king. The king summoned the man and said, "You evil servant, I forgave your entire debt when you begged for mercy. Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy?" The king was furious and put the screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. And that's exactly what my Father in heaven is going to do to each one of you who doesn't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy. This idea that Jesus forgave us freely, and this expectation that forgiven people forgive people. Freely you have received, freely give. And this is the key to getting free, to living free, to removing the root of bitterness and moving into a better future for you and for the people in your sphere. Hey, one more thing before I hand back to Molly. Next week, we're launching our annual, every year we teach a series on financial management, biblical principles and perspectives on financial management. It's such an important topic. And that's why we hit it every year. It's one of our big rocks in our teaching calendar. So next week, we're launching our annual series. This year, we're calling it 100. What and how we can best manage the 100% that God blesses us with financially. So I'd love you to join us for that. It's going to be incredibly encouraging, incredibly helpful, and of course, as always, invite somebody to join you for our online experience. I'll see you then.